Hello, my name is Mordred Viking, and I'd like to welcome you to this stream of Hearts of Iron 4, where we are back on the New World Order. And we're going to play as England, which I believe have now been properly implemented. As soon as I find where they are. There they are. Although American aid came to the English in the World War, it was too late, and for the first time England was invaded by a foreign power. Her empire stripped away with an occupation force ensuring good order and civility of the English people. England now faces its darkest hour, with no Arthur to save it. If anything can be said of the British, however, it is that they are hard-headed, and even now, 20 years later, whispers of rebellion spread. The nation now sits on a tipping point, collaborate with the wicked Hun, or risk everything to stop them. We have Her Majesty's Most Loyal Resistance. Her Majesty's Most Loyal Resistance has been a persistent annoyance for over a decade, absorbing the communist and rogue military units which form the majority of the resistance to the government's authority pre-London Uprising. Evidence suggests, however, that the organisation formed mere moments after our surrender to Germany, and that their worrisome ability to stay largely undetected in the machinations limits our own ability to respond. In addition, HMMLR is believed to have a significant number of former high military personnel in its ranks, in addition to the regular terrorists, which raises the question of whether they intend more direct action against us one day. Own people's hate. The Douglas Home government has the distinction of being the only government to last more than 4 years since the end of the war with Germany. Unfortunately, it's not popular with a good many of the people it rules despite this. The exact reasons vary from perceived illegitimacy to discontent with the state of England and even the simple desire to avenge those killed by the Germans or the collaborationist government. This lack of public support limits the government's ability to meaningfully pass legislation as the royal party and its factions rest on the nice edge of becoming outright despised by the otherwise apathetic population. Fixing this will be a challenge, to say the least. Across the channel, experience gain actually goes down, division training time increased, factory output minus 200%, dockyard output minus 200%, cannot train units, disband units or edit unit templates. This modifier is dependent on how dominant the Cornwall garrison and Germany with it are in relation to England. England is less than 40 kilometres away from the German Reich across the English Channel, and despite our best efforts they have maintained the continued necessity of their garrison in Cornwall, keeping a hand ever ready to strike. The treaty signed at the end of the war mandates that we limit not only the size of our military but its composition too, with strictly limited numbers of tanks and aircraft and a similarly restricted navy in the grotesque parody of the Treaty of Versailles. But whilst the Germans have insisted upon keeping the treaty strictly in force, there remains a possibility that if the situation in Germania or England were to change, that this could be superseded. Alright, let's do this. TNO is a weird timeline, but it's got a lot of room for stories to explore the universe and reconquer various countries. I think it's got a lot of potential to be a great story-driven mod. I would agree. My least favourite kind of game is one that feels like some strategy is not viable and wrong. What's that in relation to? Of Englishmen and the rest of the world, what is there to say, but they invaded most of it at one point or another. Perhaps then it is inevitable that they would be subjected to the same depredations that they inflicted on 1,000 nations at the hands of Germany. England, in this new and untested era, is not the same place as it once was. For, instead of the traditional power structures, it is led by a loose alliance of those who want no more war with the Reich. The Royal Party, under Alec Douglas Home, the party was recovered greatly from the miserable days of the war and the chaos following the 1953 London Uprising by the Communist Revolutionaries. Home leads the moderate faction of the RP, the largest portion of the coalition dedicated more to stability than any true ideals beyond that. At his side is Harold Macmillan and the Reformists, who nominally adhere to the democratic principles but are willing to compromise with Home for the good of England. Also present are the hardliners, dedicated fascists led by Arthur Kenneth Chesterton, who advocate for a state closer to the German model. Despite their differences, all three of these groups have been willing to work together for the sake of England's recovery. But recovery doesn't mean stability, for another faction exists within England, the HMMLR. Her Majesty's most loyal resistance is a network of several different rebel groups, all answering to one unknown man, allegedly the boss. The organisation itself can be traced back to the aftermath of the Second World War, but it wasn't until the defeat and nigh annihilation of the Communist Party of Great Britain at the Third Battle of Cable Street that the HMMLR rose to the fore of English rebel organisations. The HMMLR proper are dedicated to the return of the person they believe is the rightful monarch of England, Queen Elizabeth II. A somewhat conservative organisation, it is surprising that they allied with the second largest faction, the Left Resistance, led by Bill Alexander, a veteran of the West Russian War, Spanish Civil War, and a dozen wars in between, along with being one of the few notable survivors of the Third Cable Street. The Left Resistance are an eclectic mix of communists, socialists, and even most of the old Labour Party united under a common banner and cause. The third piece of the puzzle can be found in David Stirling and his commandos, the only rebel group to be an active rebellion from the end of the Second World War when he deserted. Stirling's commandos are the smallest of the three major parts of the HMMLR, but also the best trained and equipped. What sets them apart from their brethren, however, is their fierce republicanism and unquenchable desire for vengeance upon the traitors of England. These two factions will eventually have to face off, though in what circumstances and when remains to be seen, but the victor will have an opportunity to decide not just the fate of England, but potentially the fate of Britain as well. Decide the fate of England through elections and politicking, reunite the Isles, for better or worse, play your part in the great game between the Reich and the OFN. England prevails. Nice V for victory quote there. Tally-ho! Oh, your comments on CK3. Okay. Alright, so what do we have going on? First of all, we have our army. We do have a couple of light armour. We have military police. And the Honourable Artillery Regiment. Oops. All of you which can be commanded by a Field Marshal. So the Light Division have got infantry with recon, artillery and engineers. The armoured infantry are IFVs, motorised and elite infantry. Why? The infantry are just going to limit their speed. I guess for the armour. Then we've got the Royal Military Police, which are just 3 units of light infantry. And then the 1 unit of Honourable Artillery Company, which is just 1 unit of artillery. Okay. Amusing. Then we have our focus with that annoying clunk. Tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. The surrender of the United Kingdom at the end of the war unfortunately was not enough to keep dissidents quiet in England. Though many attempted conspiracies have been crushed over the years, and it looked like we may finally be past the dark times following the Third Battle of Cable Street. In recent years, a new organisation has waged war from the shadows. Pretentiously titled Her Majesty's Most Loyal Resistance, they, along with the Left Resistance, have been a thorn on our side like none other. Assassinations, falsified anti-government propaganda, and even bombings by HMMLR have become increasingly common, and things are starting to get out of hand. But the King is set to make a speech on the matter soon, which hopefully will help us turn public opinion to our point of view. I was wondering that. Who is the King? Edward VIII. crowned by the Germans to be their puppet. Rather a different character from the Kaiserreich Edward. His Majesty Edward VIII, the twice-crowned King of England, is hated by many from Bill Alexander to the English Church. Born during the reign of Queen Victoria II, Edward was directly in line for the British throne. He was crowned first in 1936 and reigned for an uneventful 3 years before the crisis struck. Edward VIII was marrying an American divorcee, and in order to do that, he was forced to give up his position as king. This was not to last. When the Germans landed on the shores of England, they crowned Edward as their puppet, and once again Edward was reluctantly King of England. His second reign, however, was far more disastrous than the first, and far less short, with HMMLR growing in strength every day, and the country in economic crisis as he watched. In truth, Edward would want nothing more than to abdicate his throne, but now it falls to him to guide his nation through the time of turmoil. So we're currently 62% stability. And everything right now seems to be pink, which I think is Kingdom of England. Right, technology. It is now 1962. We are really far behind with gun tech. Although, let's take a look at the industry first, because we are equally far behind. Oh no, we've got construction up to date. Just nothing else. Engineering. We are 1 short, so I think we're going to get you. I think we're going to start working on the infantry weapon improvements too. And then maybe doctrine? Strategic theorem. I need to remember how these work. So maneuver... No, I don't remember. Defense, soft attack, ground support. So that is Air Force. Massive organization buff. Then here we have support companies and recon and ground support. Or artillery and tank and ground support. Okay, so you get a lot of CAS buffs with this. And then air support, which is even more ground support. And it's also air assault, so helicopters. Marine defense, marine recovery, soft attack organization, marine efficiency, sortie efficiency. Sorties are carriers. Well, we have maneuver warfare, which is tanks and armor. Division speed, org loss or moving planning speed. Then we have Schwerpunkt, tanks, organization, motorized infantry, tanks. Or we have massive bombardment, which is artillery. Now, part of this question is going to be down to what resources do we have? Loads and loads of steel. Little bit of aluminium. No tungsten. Although, as we know, Iberia tends to be pretty independent, so importing it from Iberia wouldn't be that much of a problem. Have I played any of the Command & Conquer remasters? I haven't, no. I have, however, watched Prompt Commander playing them. That Cornwall is simply dubious. That's not really Cornwall, it's the German garrison. So, steel. What requires steel to produce? We don't have a source of oil. Though again, can be imported. Are there any decisions which have oil production, maybe? Because this would be the era of the North Sea oil. So I'm going to take that and just assume that there is going to be oil. Which means that we can go close air support if we wanted to. Britain has always been good at Air Force. So this could well be an opportunity for combined operations. Especially because we have the naval support buffs. Yeah, I think we're going to work on the combined operations. Because I think we went Strategic Theorem with Kemerovo. We did Maneuver Warfare with Iberia. So we're going to do combined operations. We'll switch to you. Okay, civilian factories. We have got 1 available. And we could increase the infrastructure in, say, Oxfordshire. Or Yorkshire. Or Lancashire. You know, I think that Lancashire really does deserve building up. Let's build. We already have a lot. See, this is the downside to this game. It's hard to tell where we're going to get free infrastructure. Although, if memory serves, they don't really tend to give you much free infrastructure. So infrastructure is a thing you just got to build. So Lancashire, congratulations. We'll build those 3 up. It's gonna take a while though because 1 factory. Military factories are probably left off. GDP at the moment is shrinking. We do have 39 billion in debt. Interest is pretty low. Construction spending is through the roof. We are currently spending 15 billion and gaining deficit of 7.5 billion, so our debt is only going to rise, and it's going to rise rapidly. So I'm actually tempted to decrease construction budget some more. New capital in Wakefield. Mandatory bans leave fan association membership. No, mandatory membership to the Lancaster Giant Axe. Lancaster Dolly Blues. Oh, right, yes, you do get both of these, but that's a split. And then this end you get both. Whereas here it's a split, and here it's a split. So that is going to be a lot of ground support. So CAS is going to be incredibly important for us. And considering how important it is, it's difficult to make an argument for the naval support stuff. That's alright. We'll probably just go for an excellent air force. At least that's the theory. So, economics. I don't know how... See, this is one thing I don't like about TNO, is I don't know how important it is to balance all of this. I feel like it should be really important, but also... it just hasn't been. I'm still going to play it as if debt is bad, even if there isn't actually any big negative for having a big amount of debt. I'm still going to play as if debt is bad. So we are going to shrink construction budget a little bit more. What the hell is the civilian spending on? Oh, GDP. It's the social welfare state, isn't it? Yeah, healthcare, pensions. It's kind of annoying that deficit and reserves are shown here before income. These two should be the other way round. Debt, income, deficit, or surplus. However, this does mean that I think I can spend... Well, do I need to spend anything on military right now? No, I don't think I do. So we're going to leave the military factories just off. And how's the Royal Navy looking? 64 ships is actually more than I thought it would be. Carrier, a battleship, a armoured cruiser, light cruisers, destroyers, subs. Okay. Are we supporting the King Kong government or are we overthrowing it? Overthrowing. I like Sterling. Low manpower. Well, some things never change. Oh, yes. Training? You guys could definitely do with a spot more training. So, let's do a spot more training. The Copper and the Rebel. Timothy O'Fisherty considered himself about as normal as one could be under these circumstances. He'd left school once he could read and write, followed his dad into being a bobby once he left at the age requirements, got to the rank of inspector, and even found a nice lass to settle down with. But the rest of the world? Tim happened to think the rest of the world wasn't so normal at all. The police hadn't changed much since the Germans invaded. Tim never got the chance to fight. London surrendered before the Germans reached his unit's position, but he'd known more than a few good men who didn't live to see the war's end. In his eyes, it was what came after that had been worse, the London uprising, not to mention the constant terrorism, not by Fenians but by Englishmen against their German tyrants, and Tim had to stop them. But whenever he thought of the government, they had a point. The rebels winning might well end the Germans coming back, and for his wife and daughter's sake he'd do anything to prevent that. Passing Inspector O'Flaherty was Griselda Robbins, a young woman whom the police would probably put a great amount of effort into finding if they knew who she was. Griselda had grown up under the boom. She watched the Germans kill her friend in the London uprising and watched her brother beg on the streets because he couldn't earn a living with his leg blown off. No matter what the government promised, the Germans hadn't left. Which is why she joined the HMMLR. It hadn't been easy. Griselda had followed rumours for months before they noticed her, and after she passed a test of loyalty, she ended up joining the local cell. London might be the home of the traitors after all, but they were an arrogant bunch who can even notice the moving beneath their feet. The die is cast. Mordred Viking low manpower. Name a more iconic duo. Cardboard Fort. Thank you very much for the follow. Welcome to the channel. Right, so we've got the Prime Minister speaks, or a state beneath their feet. His Majesty's Most Loyal Resistance, a catch-all term for a problem that's eluded solutions for nigh on 20 years. The current organisation is probably better described as a combination of three. David Sterling and his commandos are the largest rogue military unit in England, which didn't surrender following the war, and the only one left active in England proper. Bill Alexander and the Left Resistance are an amalgamation of assorted leftist partisans and Labour supporters. Though they might not be influential as the CPGB that perished at the Third Cable Street. Infuriatingly, however, the original HMMLR's leader is unknown, some spymaster in the shadows, no doubt if he even still lives. But he somehow managed to get almost every major partisan organisation in England to answer to him despite ideological differences. This organisation is a thorn in our side. We must excise it. You know what, I bet the spymaster's Edward. It's either Edward or Elizabeth. That's my guess. So this will enable gameplay from the perspective of the HMMLR, which includes sabotaging Edward's speech. Okay, maybe not Edward. Will give us the ability to monitor the extent of the government's territorial control via the decisions menu, and we get the event hidden beneath their feet. Or we can go with the Prime Minister. England is a nation of compromise, our very existence dependent on the fact that the Germans considered it not worth the effort to puppet us like the Dutch or the Norwegians. Regardless of some of our fellows' opinions on the matter of furthering or lessening ties to our benefactors across the Channel, our first priority must be the continued survival of England above all else. The King may think he can calm the recent tensions with a speech and a proud word, but we know better. These tensions represent an existential threat to our nation's survival. Let us instead use this opportunity to secure the government's position and point out that we do not have the capacity to fight Germany, no matter what the would-be rebels say. This will enable gameplay from the perspective of the government, which includes preparing a safe speech for Edward. Will give us the ability to monitor the extent of the HMMLR's territorial control via the decisions menu. And we get the event, the man with the plan. We're definitely going HMMLR, because that sounds interesting. Righto, onwards. Maybe his reliance on the Caballeros incited all those Catholic heresies. Loving horses are heretical after all. Touché. And yet the Spanish did. Caballeros were kind of important. Actually, okay. No, I'm going to rescind all of that because I know nothing about their history. It's just occurred to me, like, that's a military group I know nothing about. At all. Except the fact that they were kind of important because they're both in medieval total war and also Crusader Kings. Yeah, I know my fuel's about to run out. It's because we're training our motorized units. We can always start importing some if we need to. A state beneath their feet. Griselda was part of the only HMMLR cells inside the City of London proper, and probably the only one which wasn't outright underground. At first she'd just been a regular member, but with those above her being continually killed or driven out by the collabs, she finally found herself the leader of the cell. Most of her days consisted of working as a barmaid in a pub sympathetic to the cause, listening in on conversations and keeping an eye out for new recruits. Every now and then, though, her cell would get some real work, smuggling out firearms, explosives, or even important people to cells in other parts of the country. Of course, sometimes the higher-ups wanted her to do something. As far as Griselda knew, she answered to whomever coordinated London proper. She never saw them, only got marching orders through a dead drop or coded letter. If she were to be honest with herself, Griselda wasn't that fussed on the return of the Queen, or whatever the official line was. Griselda wanted revenge against those who betrayed England, and if the HMMLR were the ones offering, who was she to turn them down? She was she was part of the fight for freedom, and she would die for it if need be. The motivations of a person can be as simple as a knife, or how complex as a maze. I wonder if they've updated England's tree as the HMMLR once they've taken over. Yeah, apparently England is now one of the full 10-year groups, I think. I'm just going to double check that. Workshop. I'm fairly sure there was an update fairly soon after I started playing this where that was done.